When it comes to evolution, then everybody knows what that means and practices it in their technical delivery of things and their learning of everything. But what's not so widely understood often is the idea of involution, which involves inward development, basically, involvement. So there's evolution, which is the external side, and, if you like, the yang side, the fire element. Conversely, there's the water, inner involvement, involution. So we have this idea of externalizing yang and internalizing yin. So what's the relevance of this? At times it's better to evolve, and at other times it's better to involve. So any evolution of practice is the externalization of energy. So for instance, if I were to do a punch, there's an external output of energy. However, in order to give out, there needs to be a taking in. So in order to externalize that, there needs to be an internal energy first of all. There can't be evolution without involution. So basically, the inner practices work on involution, and the outer hard styles of martial arts look at evolution. However, in fact, both occur at once to some degree. So, for instance, if I were to punch, there's an evolution of my skill, there's a external use of force. There's also counterbalancing that and going on at the same time. There's an equal inner energy supporting that externalization. So this is just a way of looking at yin and yang working together. So if there's an externalization of the energy, there's a equal and opposite internalization, which often isn't emphasized as much as it should be, perhaps. The Chinese systems and others have divided man into the internal form and the external. So according to Chinese medicine, for instance, the external aspect of man, such as the outside of his body, for example, the outside of the arm, the outside of the hip, etc., the neck, the shoulders, these are all externally heavy, externally charged, if you like, aspects of the anatomy. The internal, such as the inside of the arm, is more sensitive. You can check that just by touching the inside and then touching the outside. There'll be more sensitivity on the inside. So, more broadly, the further you go inward, the more internalized and involved you become in your practice. The more external, the more evolved it becomes, the more externalized. But, as I say, the two aspects are going on at once in tandem. So if there was, for instance, an externalization of punching here, there would be counterbalance of internalization on this side. There would be a lot of supporting activity in the structure, inner involvement on the side that isn't attacking. Likewise, if I were to punch with this side would then be involved, and this side would be evolved in that moment, according to this idea. So, whenever you're doing external hard practice of any sort, you're at the same time, whether you realise it or not, actually doing an involution of energy. So you're heavily involved. It depends which one you focus on. What the focus will be, what the attention will be drawn to, external or internal, will be entirely up to the individual to decide what's best at that time. One way that practice has been viewed is according to the monthly calendar. During the waning of the moon, certain practices have emphasized more emphasis on internal involvement, whereas during the waxing of the moon, there's an ascension of energy upwards and outwards. So it's easier to do externalized activity during these phases of energy where the moon is growing, and it's easier to look inwards and descend into yourself, involve, when the moon is waning. Likewise, another way of looking at it is during the daytime, as the energies are on the ascent from morning till noon, there's a externalization of energy which you've gathered in sleep, because there's very little, or there should be ideally very little activity going on in sleep. So that's perfect for regeneration and development of energies. It's then time in that morning and up to midday to externalize and work from within to outside. In the afternoon, the cycle involves going down, descending once again, involving. So there's a daily, monthly, yearly cycle. These are just two ways of looking at it. Ascension and descension. The involved aspect of attention and awareness and being tends to descend to the center, the hara center, the solar plexus. These are centers of concentration. So there's a concentration in which involves energy being stored in a compact area and channeled inwardly. So in this instance you notice a contraction inwards as the energy is drawn. So from these same centers the contraction of energy can spread out. So there's always a contraction and expansion going on at the same time. At the same time, whenever there's an expansion, this is done from the center. So it's no use existing on the periphery if the center of being is in the middle. So for example, say you have a circle, you have a tiny dot in the middle of concentrated energy which then externalizes. In the same way, any external energy which has been powerfully evolved and used has its basis in the center. So anything that's big and externalized and expanded has a tiny center of concentration, like an atom, which, if brought back in, can concentrate but the purpose of the atom is to become a center around which expansion takes place. Electrons are attracted to this force, and the two are reciprocal. So there is both going on at once, whichever way you look at it. Whenever there's an externalized energy, there's a counteracting and equal internalization. So if let's think of an example. If I were to throw a ball at the wall, it would rebound at the exact same speed, pace, and energy and distance that it hit the wall with. There's obviously factors of gravity and air resistance and things like that, but generally speaking, the rebound is the same as the energy back is the same as the energy given out. It's the balancing of energy. So this gives us some idea that anything we do externally equally can be concentrated on within. So any external form of martial arts, the hard styles, can equally become the basis of internalization and self-realization, as well as outside effects taking place. So what to focus on? Well, for me, it's always the internal work taking place which takes the basis of attention. Any goal or any style which happens to manifest itself is a result of the involvement that has taken place within. So rather than focusing on external effects, the peripheral, the externalized energy, it can be beneficial to focus inwardly at the causal level of energy, so that the effects take care of themselves. They may not be what you would contrive as an effect, but if there's a deep involvement, a deep energy that's being nourished, cultivated and wisely used, then there can't be any question of the effects taking place, the manifestation being externalized, because when the effort and the work and the involvement is so intense, how can there be anything other than deep involvement and energy? Because the same energy which is internalized eventually grows. If your training takes an involved purpose, that means everything is delivered from within as the basis. For example, if there was a punch, that can be done from the core, even at the superficial level of physicality. It can be done from the core rather than all the energy being sent into the hand and then thrown out rather mindlessly. So everything from the core takes a stable position. On the mental, motivational level, obviously everything can be broken down to be highly motivated in terms of survival. So for instance, to secure a mate, food, all this kind of thing. However, deep involvement means that even those emotional needs derive themselves from something deeper, which is a purpose, which can be entirely made up, which can then affect motivational states. In other words, when you're deeply involved, the emotional states take a new dimension, because they're from the basis of something other than external demands. As I was saying before, the form the body takes is twofold. There's an internal yin side, which is anything on the inside of the body, the inside of the limbs, the inside of the legs, for instance. The external side, the outside tends to be more yang, so there's an interaction of the two taking place at all times. So anytime we're moving around, there can be a focus on the internal structure, the internal feel, rather than the external feel. So the external feel would be more in line with aggression and power, muscular force. The internal side would be more intuitively sensing, listening inwardly to what needs to be done, and fully being involved. So there's a drive to externalize and a focus to internalize. So I'll just give a demonstration of moving around from within, leading from the core physically, however, listening from within and sensing from within. So that involves moving from an inner position. So what's the goal? What's the external goal? We talk about external goals, what you want to achieve physically. Well, to me, from the point of involvement of involution, which is taking a inner stance, an inner center of existence, from that perspective, there's no external goal other than to simply concentrate inwardly. Now there's a external attention which is good, but it takes a lot of energy to maintain that, and eventually can lead to wear and tear if too much externalized energy takes place. The internal concentration is from the center, and therefore it's a relatively effortless endeavor. So if the goal of focus is to turn inwardly and focus in that sense inwardly, rather than worry about exactly what it looks like, exactly whether it's technically correct, whether you're a black belt or anything else, then the goals take care of themselves, really, because when you're working from this center, there's an intense concentration of energy within, which really is the basis of any external evolution taking place. So if there's to be constant evolution, the true goal of moving forward and progressing, then in my mind the goal should be to constantly, with vigilance, focus inward so that a constant evolution takes place. The problem with external goals is that they're fixed, and once you reach that, there's no involvement anymore. On the other hand, if your goal is to constantly evolve and to have this goal shift constantly, the goalposts are constantly moving, then you don't need to worry about ever achieving anything. So long as you're moving forwards, it's okay to have external goals. There's nothing wrong with them at all. And they're good for orientating our physical existence. But if you take care to listen inwardly and focus and involve yourself totally, there can be no question of a goal being met, because you're bringing this absolute intensity to everything you do, not just one goal here, one goal there. So this, to me, is a high ideal. And having that as the ideal, constant involution, ensures constant evolution, because the one cannot take place without the other. And if one is of such a high intensity the other one, the other twin aspect of the process, evolution and involution, the other one takes care of itself. You can't. So, in other words, if you identify with the work of reaching the goal rather than the goal itself, then that ensures you're taking every step to actually reach the goal. So by working on this idea of involution, inner involvement and effort and work towards the goal, then the goal is largely taken care of by itself, with a few minor adjustments, of course, and certain exercises, because we can't eliminate that. There's got to be physical goals, there's got to be reachable goals, but the overarching goal that encompasses all the rest is constant work, involution, and involvement.